Sponsored by Taylor Freelance, Rainier Ballistics, Hodgson Powders, and JPL Precision.
Hey Power Factor fans, as you know, we often do some kind of Q&A segments. We get some questions from the viewers, and sometimes they're kind of a more general interest. So even though we send individual responses to questions, if you've ever posted a comment or question on YouTube or whatever, we try to get back to everybody. And sometimes there's questions that are kind of a more general interest, so we try to cover those on the show. And we're just going to do a few of those. It's kind of our Reader's Right segment, and so here we go. Hello, I'm planning on shooting my first non-sanctioned IDP match in 2 weeks. I have an M&P Performance Center 9mm, 4.25 inch. I have the holster, mag pouches, and belt. I also have a non-ported barrel. Just wondering what class I should sign up for. Well, the question, it's kind of in two parts. Smith & Wesson 9mm M&P is legal under normal conditions in stock service pistol and stock condition. If you get to the point where you've made too many modifications to it to satisfy the SSP rules, you're then in ESP, enhanced service pistol, where more mods are allowed. Now, I'm not that familiar with the entire line of M&P pistols, but when the shooter says, I also have a non-ported barrel, that suggests that the gun came with a ported barrel. Now, in SSP division, any barrel replacements have to be of standard configuration. And while that's not really elaborated on, essentially it means ported barrels aren't allowed. And if you remove the ported barrel and put a non-ported barrel in it, that barrel is of non-standard configuration, so it's not allowed either. So essentially, if you've got a gun that you bought that has a ported barrel, even if you swap the barrel out for a non-ported barrel, it's not legal for stock service pistol. Now, if you want to change the barrel and run it in ESP, then there are more modifications allowed, and you could put a replacement barrel in your gun that had originally had a ported barrel, replace it with a non-ported barrel, and then shoot an enhanced service pistol. So that's the answer to your question, Dave, and anybody else who's interested, is that you just have some requirements in SSP that are a little more restrictive. So if you want to shoot your ported gun with the non-ported barrel, shoot it in ESP. Question number 2. This one's from Bruce. I bought a Range Officer Champion to shoot in CCP, concealed carry pistol. It's his first 1911. My shooting buddies are telling me that their experience is it won't be reliable because 1911s, oh, this is funny, because 1911s, as if to suggest that 1911s by nature are unreliable, and especially short ones are finicky. What is your take? Are they right, or just not committed enough to maintain and feed it properly? Well, obviously the latter. 1911 is not a gun for duffers or people who are used to shooting Glocks. I mean, it's more like an expert's weapon, I'd say. So if you're a committed shooter, interested, it's sort of like owning a 1911 is sort of like owning a Jaguar, in that when it's running, it is like a sublime driving experience. But Jaguar is known, there's a phrase that refers to Jaguar as, why use one part when 10 parts will do? And, if you've ever looked at the rear suspension of an older E-type Jag, there's, 4 shock absorbers and, 5,000 washers and stuff in it. And the 1911, I think, is a little bit that way. You have to take an interest in the gun to get the best performance out of it. People will ask, what 1911 can I buy over the counter? I won't have to worry about any issues with reliability, and I would say there's no guarantees. If you've watched earlier episodes or you've paid attention to anybody on the subject, you have certain incompatibility potential for guns and magazines and ammo, and it can take, again, just kind of a bit of dedication to finding the right combination. I mean, if you've watched my episodes, about what I went through trying to find a combination of magazine tube, magazine follower, and magazine spring that would work in one of my guns, it shouldn't be that much of an adventure, but that's kind of what we have in the world of 1911, which really doesn't mean anything anymore. I mean, it would be like buying an oil filter for a Ford Mustang And why doesn't it fit on my Camaro? You know, I mean, it's like, why would you expect it to? So if you've got a 1911 that's been made in the Philippines by Armscor, and a part on it isn't exactly like a gun made by Ed Brown or Wilson Combat or Les Baer or Springfield or Colt or Remington or Ruger or Para, that might just be the way it is. And you've also have situations now with some manufacturers not even attempting to stick with normal GI kind of dimensions. I mean, I think there was always, even as guns were improved in terms of tighter tolerances and whatnot, there was always the sense that you didn't want to stray too far from the original military specifications to help ensure that you would have interchangeable parts, or at least parts that were easily fitted. And that has kind of started to go away with the proliferation of guns with external extractors, like those guns made by SIG and Smith & Wesson. You have guns with non-standard rail dimensions. I think Smith & Wesson, I was going to say Smith & Wesson is guilty of that. But you might ask, well, you know, if you're not building the gun specifically to have parts that are interchangeable with a gun that was designed 100 years ago, but you're trying to improve upon the 1911 design, is there really a necessity to stick with any of the original specifications? I mean, we have high cap guns, we have guns with optical sights, we have guns with frames made of metal, frames made of plastic. There's so many variations. Is it really necessary anymore to stick with the original specifications? And one of the guns that's been on the market, one of the gun styles that's been on the market for a number of years that really gets away from all those specifications is a gun that is generally referred to as a CCO, a concealed carry officer. And what that means is you've got a slide length that is more like a commander than a compact. Today's compact pistols are mostly 3-inch barrels. And then you're combining the slightly longer slide with the compact frame. So for some manufacturers like Colt, their CCO is a 4.25 commander length slide on their officer's length butt. Some other manufacturers, it might be a 4-inch slide depending on what their kind of mid-size gun is. But this specific question asks about the Springfield RO compact, which is essentially Springfield's CCO version of their range officer chambered in 9mm. Now, I owned a range officer for a while. I thought it was a great gun. You can go back and look at the episodes I did on my range officer. It subsequently came out in a 9mm full size. Then they made a compact 45, then the compact 9. And if you're a 1911 specialist, I mean, you really like your 1911s, I think the 9mm RO would be an excellent gun for the new CCP division, because you've got your barrel length that will fit in the box and is legal. You've got your butt length that is shorter than a full-length gun. But with a 9mm, even an officer's length compact frame will still hold 8+1. You don't have any ammo concerns. So I think the range officer is a good idea conceptually as a gun, say, for CCP competition, but I'm still not convinced that the 9mm platform is as suitable for the 9mm, the 1911 platform is as suitable for the 9mm cartridge as it is for the longer cartridges that more closely resemble the overall length of the 45 cartridge that the gun was designed around. I mean, it's a system, and part of that system is a cartridge that's 1.25 inches long. And I think when you vary too much from that overall length, the gun's reliability suffers. You see 9mm magazines that have a spacer in the back to push the cartridge further to the front of the tube. You see magazine tubes that have essentially a supplementary feed ramp formed into the tube to help get that round out of the tube and into the chamber. And I think it's just a little too fiddly, and that's my perspective. And I see whenever I have mentioned my perspective on a forum, somebody will say, well, I've had a 1911 and 9mm that I bought in 1957 and it's never malfunctioned, and I'm sure that's the case. But in my experience, a full-size 45 is going to be a pretty reliable gun unless there's really something wrong with it. If you start shrinking it down, either externally or internally, by going to a smaller cartridge, shorter butt, shorter barrel, which means shorter springs, it is not going to be as reliable. So I would say, if I were going to just, through my crystal ball, project the reliability of the Springfield Range Officer, I would say the most reliable version is going to be the 5-inch 45. The second most reliable version is probably going to be something of a tie between the compact 45 and the full-size 9, and the least reliable version is going to be the compact 9. And it could be that that's the difference between one malfunction every 1,000 rounds versus one malfunction every 2,000 rounds versus one malfunction every 3,000 rounds, and you can decide if that's reliable enough for you. Most of my guns, I have fired 1,000 rounds without an issue, and there's too many variables. What if you have a problem once every 1,000 rounds? What is it? Was it a high primer? Was it a burr on a case rim? Was it the magazine spring was a little bit weak? Was there a piece of schmutz in the chamber? You can't chase down a malfunction that happens every 1,000 rounds. But if you are looking at reliability in that, and you want your gun to be extremely reliable, I'd say shrinking the gun down and going with a short, small diameter cartridge means the gun's going to be less reliable. Question number 3. Was wondering about the IDPA vision barrier. Maybe I should know after a year of this, but in about 6 IDPA matches in Florida, I have never been told about a vision barrier of a different color or ID easier, so I guess they can call it soft cover. I will check next time. No penalty for shooting through a vision barrier? A vision barrier, the rule describes a vision barrier as something that blocks your view of the target, and because it does physically block the view of the target, it is opaque and it is penetrable. So it's something that you can't see through, but it is soft cover. And because we do a lot of moving around walls, and we have walls downrange that will become cover positions, we visually differentiate between what is going to be a wall that serves as cover and what is a wall that's serving as a vision barrier by making it a different color. So for instance, at our recent state championship match, we had a stage with a vision barrier that blocked the view of a target that as you moved across the stage would become revealed by an opening between the vision barrier and what would be the next shooting position. And so all the walls on the stage were black except for the vision barrier, which was green. On a couple of the other stages, all the cover, hard cover, cover for shooting positions were green, and your vision barrier was black. And so it's just a contrast. It doesn't matter really what the covers are. Now, black generally designates hard cover. The rule book says use black for hard cover. And so you could argue that we violated the rule by making the vision barrier black, but I felt at the time that designating the vision barrier visually as different from the other walls, specifying this is vision barrier, I felt like that was the important thing, that people would not be, oh my God, it's black. That wasn't going to be the issue, that, oh, it's a different color, so remember that that's not covered, that's a vision barrier. And because it's penetrable, it's probably a good idea to make the vision barrier out of something that it's okay if it gets shot up. We accept that at our major match that some of our walls and vision barriers are going to get shot up. But if you already have a wall, let's say whether it's a piece of plywood or this corrugated plastic like we use that's already got some holes in it, you can use that. And of course, there shouldn't be any confusion. When you're doing your walkthrough, it should be explicit, that this is P3 where you're going to shoot T4, but this over here, this is a vision barrier. You're not going to stop here. You're not going to reload here. You're going to keep moving, and this target is going to be revealed as you do so, and it must be engaged on the move. There shouldn't be any confusion about it, but I think there's going to be some, you're going to have instances where it's just not neat and tidy like that, where, oh, the one wall that's a different color is the vision barrier. You're just going to have to remember, for instance, okay, remember that wall over there by T4, that's the vision barrier, and the one next to it, that's not. And you're at a club match level, that's just going to have to suffice. And we do that too. We've got an old scrappy wall that's got holes in it already, and we don't really care too much about the color of it. We just don't want to shoot up our nice new ones. So just, make do. But you should, as part of a walkthrough, it should always be made explicit which structures are cover, which are vision barriers, and so that you can plan your approach to the stage accordingly. Because of course, if it's cover, you must stop and use it as cover. If it's a vision barrier, you can't stop. You have to keep moving and engage the targets that are revealed while on the move. Next question. This one's from Clay. Clay writes, if I'm shooting SSP with a gun, no, that was my Rosanna, Dana. We're not going to go there, though. If I'm shooting SSP with a gun that has 9-round magazines, am I required to start with 9+1, or can I just start with 8+1 so I don't have to use a 4th magazine just to load the chamber? So this is the classic Barney mag question. You can, if your magazines hold more than the limit for your division, you're allowed to add 1 round to the magazine, so that the loading procedure is simplified by just putting the mag in the gun, racking the slide, and holstering. So then you've got 10 in the gun, 10 in the mag, 1 in the chamber, and then the mags on your belt are loaded to 10. Now, if your capacity of the physical capacity of your magazine is less than what the division allows, you must load those to their physical limit. So for instance, when I shot ESP for a year, I shot a single stack 1911 38 Super. The mags hold 9 rounds. So when I started the stage, I had 9 in the first mag with a round in the chamber, necessitating a Barney mag to load the gun. So the loading process would be I'd have my 9-round magazine, put it in the gun, rack the slide, take out the mag that now has 8 rounds in it. Now your options are you can fish 1 spare round out of your pocket, put it back into that magazine, load the gun, and you're good. Most people will have a Barney mag or a 4th magazine, as was mentioned in the question. And in that case, if you have the 4th magazine, you can load the gun, take the partially depleted magazine out, stow it someplace where you are not going to use it. There are rules regarding how many magazines you can carry. And of course, there are rules about how many rounds are in the magazines that you are going to use on the stage. So that magazine that comes out of the gun that is down 1 round from its capacity, I would suggest you put it someplace where you're going to forget where you put it, because you absolutely do not want to put it in someplace where someone might determine that's a magazine that is in play on this stage and it's not loaded to capacity. So for instance, if you don't carry your mags in pouches, if you carry your reloads in a pocket, do not put that 8-round mag in the pocket, because now you're carrying too many mags and one of your mags doesn't have the required number of rounds in it. So that partially depleted mag that you pull out of the gun on the reload, put it in your hip pocket, put it in your chest pocket. Of course, you can't use this pocket when you're reloading, so this would be a perfect place for it. You know you're not going to mistakenly pull it out of there, because you never use mags that are in a breast pocket. Get rid of that mag, put a full mag in the gun, so now you're 9+1 and 2 9-round reloads on the belt. Now, I would also suggest that if you can get a 10-round mag for that gun, do so. Single stack 1911s in 9mm and 38 Super. There are 10-round mags available, and now with the new reloading rules that turn a blind eye to round dumping, there's no reason to have fewer rounds than you're allowed to carry. So if you've got a gun that holds 9 and there are extra capacity mags available that hold 10, get some of those 10-round mags. But if you're limited to 9-rounders, you either have to go through the Barney loading process of replenishing the 1 round that you cycled into the chamber and then putting that magazine back in the gun, or get rid of that magazine so that you're not tempted to use it again, and then get a full magazine, reload that into the gun. So you've got 9 in the mag, 1 in the chamber, and your 2 9-round reloads. Okay, one more question, Power Factor fans. I enjoyed today's video on IDPA reloads. I'm new to IDPA, having only shot 2 matches so far. However, I've been reading up on the sport and watching your videos for several months, in particular regarding the evolution of the rulebook over the recent year or so. I try to understand the relationship between the rules and IDPA's intent, my assumption, to link the game to somewhat real-life situations. I think that's where most people are. They're trying to see real life situations reflected in the rules. However, I am at a loss to understand IDPA's obsession, his wording, with reload rules. I get the idea for the leave no loaded mag behind concept and not being in the open with an empty gun, but their restriction on reloading on the move are not clear. The restrictions aren't clear. To my obviously novice mind and opinion, there are way more rules than needed. I'm not meaning to be critical. You are being critical. It's okay though, be critical. But I will enjoy the sport more if I understand the thought process and reasoning behind the rules. Finally, to my question. Rick, you obviously have extensive experience in history with the game. What is your take on how the reload rules have ended up where they are, and why? And do they serve the intended purpose? Interesting question. My take is that the rules have tried to evolve in a manner consistent with the principles of the sport. We're supposed to be shooting a game that has defensive principles in its DNA, let's say. But how those principles are allowed to kind of express themselves when the game is actually being played, I think is the problem. And you have people who are just, tell me what the rules are and I'll follow them. You know, they don't have this sense of, I want this gritty realism. Just give me a set of rules that I can understand and I'll follow them. Then you have the people who I think are a little more looking for IDPA to be a form of training. And so they really value the principle of realism, that we're simulating realistic scenarios that could happen to someone, who is an armed citizen or a cop or whatever it is, where you find yourself in a life-threatening situation. And you've got, I think, one issue is that I don't think there's much agreement on what's tactical. You know, what are realistic tactics? If you go on YouTube, for instance, and look at videos that are produced by people that are professing to teach or display correct tactics, you'll see numerous different examples of what some person might decide this is what's tactically correct. If you're in a shooting situation, this is what you're supposed to do. And another guy will say, if I'm in that shooting position, I'm going to do something completely different. And it can be based on experience. It can be based on, are you a law enforcement officer where you have one set of engagement rules? I mean, you talk about when you're allowed to shoot. Are you allowed to follow somebody, pursue them? The rules that apply to law enforcement officers, armed citizens, and the military are completely different. And so you can't necessarily, for instance, take a class from someone who's a military instructor and has a military mindset and is used to the kind of engagement requirements that they have and translate that to a civilian on the street. It's just completely different. And I think IDPA does a pretty good job of having kind of non-specific rules. They're not telling you that this is what you would do if you're in combat, or this is what you should do if you're a cop on the beat, or this is what you should do in a home invasion scenario. It's not based on any particular set of tactics, but there is tactical thinking behind it. So for instance, in the reloading rules, the flat-footed reload, recently departed, required you to stay put and reload your gun, even if you had cover that was between you and any threats that you might engage. Or if it were a street situation, it might be threats that were on the other side of a building. I mean, if I'm on this side of the building, the threat's on at the other end of the block, why shouldn't I reload as I move down the block? I mean, people would ask that kind of a question. And the flat-footed reload kind of enforced this idea that I'm stuck to the ground. I can't reload even if there's a situation that would seem to be a favorable reloading position where I'm not likely to get engaged while I'm reloading. And so we don't like that. It's not good tactics to stand here flat-footed, especially when I've got cover. And then, of course, you can also make that a competition-oriented question. It's quicker for me to reload on the move as I go from here to there when there's nothing to shoot. So obviously my score will be better if I do so. So you can look at it from either perspective. It's tactically sound if I have cover between me and any potential threats to do a reload while I move, and my score will be better if I reload and move and my gun is loaded when I arrive at the next shooting position. So I think you get these different arguments that are based on different perspectives, but I think you can't really argue too much with the current rules that, in my mind, encourage you to keep your gun loaded to a greater extent than past rule sets did. I felt like the rules generally rewarded you for running your gun dry. And to an extent, the removal of the round dumping rule, you could argue that, well, hold it, before you weren't allowed to dump rounds. And that seems realistic to me. If I were in a gunfight, I wouldn't waste a shot. And so it's unrealistic to dump rounds. And the new rules allow you to dump rounds, but the new rules also allow you to reload when it behooves you to do so if you decide it's a good idea. I mean, that's essentially what it comes down to. We had a stage, I was describing it in a different episode at our state match, where you're entering a room, and if your gun is dry, the rules of IDPA allow you to enter the room with an empty gun and reload on the move after you have engaged any threats that are visible from the entrance of the room. And I would say, if I've cleared the room of visible threats, then that maybe is a good time to reload. Other people might say, well, hold it. When you're entering the room, you've engaged the visible threats, but what if there's another doorway? What if there's a window? There could be somebody in that room that's essentially waiting for you. And the IDPA rules have taken that into account. You're allowed to engage surprise targets on the move, and you have the option of reloading your gun before you enter the room or as you pass through the room. So for instance, if I'm an IDPA competitor who's read the stage procedure and I see, oh, there's 2 targets that are going to appear while I'm in the room, I've only got 3 rounds in my gun, I'm going to need 4 rounds to engage those 2 targets, I should probably reload before I enter the room. Well, I think that's good tactical thinking too. If I've got 3 rounds in my gun and I'm going to cross a room and I'm not really sure what's in there or what I might find before I get to the other end, running into that room with 3 rounds in the gun probably isn't a good idea. So I think that is like, in a sense, balancing the requirements of competition and the realities, I think, of tactics, is if you feel like you're leaping into the unknown, and I think that's what was in the email that went out to IDPA members when the new reloading rules were implemented, is anytime you're leaping into the unknown, you should have a loaded gun. And I think that is kind of my favorite part of the 2015 rule book, is that theory being applied to where and when you can reload. Because it used to be in the 2013 rules, you reloaded flat-footed. In the 2012 rules, you were often reloading on the move while crossing open ground. And I don't think either of those is really a very good idea. But I think providing the shooter the possibility of deciding, I'm going to reload before I go in there, or I'm going to reload before I move, that gives you the option of thinking tactically, reloading your gun when you want to, where you want to, as long as you're not exposed to threats, or if you're at cover, moving along cover, you're allowed to reload. So I think the reloading rules really are better now than they have been. I'm still not sure that entering a room isn't that much different from crossing open ground, but I think it's, I don't want to say it's a start, but I think it's a good move. I like that idea of after I've cleared this room, I can reload as I move through it, but if I'm at a cover position, I've engaged everybody I can see, but the next wall, let's say, downrange is a 20-foot move from here to there. That is across open ground, and I shouldn't be leaving this position for that position with an empty gun or reloading as I go. I should either reload before I go or carry the rounds that I have in the gun as I move and reload after I get there. So I think the rules are just, if you think of them strictly in the defensive kind of tactical thinking, you can find holes in them. If you think of them strictly in the competition side of things, you can probably find holes in them. But I think if you just look at it as pretty much, as long as there's nothing between here and there, I can reload as I'm moving, and I can choose to reload or not. If I have a situation coming up where I need more rounds than I have in my gun, I have the option of reloading before I go. And I just think a lot of that is sound tactical thinking, to not be running around with an empty gun, not trying to run your gun dry, but trying to keep your gun loaded. And I think that's a big advance in the rules as they are now in 2015.